Well, I'm back again with what should be my final Pop Pixie video. And of course, I've saved the most difficult subject for last. That's right, today we're talking about the whitewashing that happens in Pop Pixie as well as the fantasy racism. And before I really get started, I just want to say there are many people in the world who are more educated on these subjects than I am. And I'm going to be doing my best not to misrepresent anything in this video. However, if I do, feel free to call me out about it in the comments. And with that out of the way, let's go ahead and start by talking about the whitewashing. Now, I don't know why the Winx Club has such a problem with whitewashing in general. It happened in World of Winx, it happened in Winx Club Season 8, it happened in Fate the Winx Saga when they thought they could change Flora to a white girl, and then they changed her name to Tara, thinking that would make everything better. Spoilers, it did not. So this time, the victim of unnecessary skin lightening was, of course, the only pixie of color from the original cast, Piff. Pop Pixie is just so rife with needless changes. Piff didn't even have that dark of a skin tone, and they still felt the need to go in and change her. And you may notice, just watching the show all the way through one time, there are hardly any pixies of color. They're barely in the background, if at all. I can count on one hand how many times somebody with a darker skin tone actually gets to have a speaking role in this show, which is absolutely ridiculous. There's Piff, who, even though she has had her skin tone lightened considerably, she's still more tan than your average pixie. She's also been reduced to a bit part who's barely in the show, usually just shoved into the background, which I am grateful for only because I hate it when Piff talks. I get so irrationally angry when I hear her speak. It's always jarring and unpleasant. Then there's a child in Toon's class. I don't think he ever gets a name, but he's being bullied by an elf kid, and put a pin in that, because we're coming back to that later. There's a pixie named Flower that Chara impersonates. How she does this is beyond me, because she is obviously not Flower, but whatever. Also, Flower looks a lot like Aisha to me. Then we have Glim, who is the only obviously Asian-coded pixie on screen. And the only episode that has Glim in it has him gaining his magic pop by going into the forest and training with a Asian stereotyped firefly with an accent I'm going to call uncomfortable. And the last pixie of color that we have to talk about is Giga, who is Loquette's cousin. Even though he has a very light skin tone, he's obviously black-coated because he has the dreadlocks and they gave him a jersey to wear. And this is the part where I'm going to ask for audience participation, because I literally don't know anymore if I'm just blowing this up in my own head, if it's not actually as bad as I'm making it, because I've been thinking about this for so long. Because you see, Giga is the only male pixie with any kind of a theme to his transformation. His pop pixie power is growing and shrinking. He uses these powers mostly to play pranks on people. So, what is the theme of his outfit, you may be asking? Well, obviously, it's basketball. And this kind of messes me up, because if there were more black characters on screen, I might not have even taken notice of this detail. I probably wouldn't have even batted an eyelash at it. But the fact that he is the only black male character depicted on screen, and he is the basketball one, just gives me some pause. So let me know in the comments, is this as messed up as I feel it is? Or am I just being too sensitive about this? Please let me know. Alright, so we've discussed the failure of representation in Pop Pixie, and bad as that is, it's Actually, not the worst messaging that this show has to offer as far as racism goes. But I hear you asking, head turned to the side like a confused dog, what could be worse than underrepresenting real life ethnic groups in this show? Oh, I don't know. How about the underlying message that racism and prejudice are actually justifiable? There is a clear hierarchy to how Pixieville is run. There are those at the top and those all the way down at the bottom. At the top, we have Nymphia. She's the ruler of Pixieville, and even though we don't actually see her doing all that much throughout the series, what she says goes. Then, right below her, we have rich pixies, like Cherry, or Sherry, or Cherie. She always acts like a spoiled brat, getting exactly what she wants, and she's never really called out for being in the wrong about this until the last episode, Live Like Cherry. And because it's the last episode in the series, I don't think she actually learned her lesson. Then, one more tier down, we have poor pixies and gnomes on pretty much the same level. And even poor pixies like Loquette are shown to have very nice houses. The couple times we see gnome houses, they're usually pretty modest. And even though we see some pixies in the employ of gnomes, the gnomes are never really depicted as being good bosses or even really good people. They're always shown as being cheap and greedy and quicker to anger than the pixies, which kind of just sounds like gnome slander to me. And even though, on the whole, pixies and gnomes seem to get along just fine in day to day life, they are not above calling each other by their race in a derogatory way. Which is, an exceptionally bad message to have in a show aimed at 6-year-olds. Then, further down on the list, we have magical creatures and pixie animals. And guys, I've really messed myself up thinking about these pixie animals because they are just pixies in a different shape. That's it. They think, they feel, they speak, they have wants and desires for their lives. They are shown to be in actual relationships. They go to school. They wear full sets of clothing. These are just other sentient creatures, but they are always depicted as being in some kind of service to pixies or gnomes. The brunt of the physical labor at the Pixie Plaza is pushed on to Laquette's monkey friend, pet, co-worker. His name's Guzman, and he never gets any respect from anyone. There's an episode where Amore refers to the hippo who works for her, Otis, as her sidekick, and he takes actual offense to it, and she just brushes past it. Pixie animals are depicted as being these intelligent, capable creatures, but they're always in service to pixies or gnomes. You never really see one with actual agency in the foreground of the show. There are also other magical creatures in the show besides pixie animals that seem to get more mistreatment than the pixie animals. There's one episode in particular where there is a purple beast creature. They never really say what he is, but he's a chauffeur for a rich gnome, and the gnome guy is being so mean to him. He's calling him big, hairy, lazy. He's calling him by his color in a derogatory way. This is all just stuff that is wild to include in a kids show. And it'd be one thing if they had all of this in there and they addressed it properly. I would actually be singing the show's praises if it did that. But no, it is never, not once, handled well. And the biggest thing I can point to prove that is the elves. And I know a lot of you were very excited for me to address the elf situation, but before we get to the elves, we need to discuss the witches real quick from the actual Winx Club show. So, in Winx Club, the witches are the antithesis of the fairies. The witches are a bit hard to talk about because Winx Club never really dealt with them properly. They're shown to be malicious and cruel in nature. But at the same time, witches aren't really shown to be pure evil, aside from the tricks. And we have evidence from Myrta that witches could just choose to be fairies if they really wanted to. So it's not like they're born witches, it seems to be more occupational than anything else. Like, yeah, people are probably not going to be won over by the fact that they're witches. Yeah, they're probably going to run up against some prejudice, but at the end of the day, going to Cloud Tower was a choice that they made. So let's take that problem and dial it all the way up to 11 because elves don't get a choice. They are born elves in a pixie's world. And let me tell you, elves can just never catch a break. Elves get treated like criminals, even when they haven't done anything wrong yet. And yeah, typically they are up to something. But I would actually argue that they aren't like this naturally. It is the pixie society that has driven them to these behaviors. I can understand banning individuals from participating in certain things or from coming to certain venues because they have caused trouble in the past. But you can't just blanket statement say, elves are not welcome here. That is such a problematic thing to have in a kids show, especially when it doesn't get called out as wrong. The Pixies are always showing prejudice against elves, and it is never once brought up that, hey, maybe we're being too hard on them, or what if we just treat them nice and normally? And there are 3 different episodes that I want to showcase to illustrate my point. First off is Yuka and Lenny at war. I just want to point out this episode opens up with Amore spying on people's private lives behind closed doors with some kind of high tech magic device that can seek out people having arguments. And that is overstepping if I've ever seen it. Like, girl, just stick to your shop. Don't go barging in on people's private lives. But we open up on Yuka being very upset with Lenny because the dude's just playing a video game. He's just getting into it. She complains that he's not doing his share of the housework, and side note, she says the phrase, "You need to show me the disrespect I deserve," which is not a great message to have in a kids show. I get it. The elves are supposed to be topsy-turvy from the Pixies. This is still not a great phrase to include in a show for small children who are developing their views on the world. But Lenny's just acting distracted, and we know almost right away it's the video game. It's like magically hypnotizing him so that Yuka is not getting the majority of his attention. But he's not acting extremely respectful or disrespectful to anybody. He just seems kind of distracted. And that's where my major point for this episode comes in. It's not like he's a fundamentally different person. He's just not being rude, he's just being absent minded. There are times when he's just walking down the street and people freak out, like, oh no, there's an elf. And he notices them, tries to be helpful, messes it up a little bit, but he's not being malicious. He's too distracted for that. Which makes me believe that elves are not inherently rude or anything. They're just acting out in a way that society tells them they ought to. Like, oh, you think that I'm automatically bad? Well, then I'll just be worse than that. Amore steps in with a love potion to try and help Yuka and Lenny with their romance problem. And as somebody pointed out on one of my recent videos, Amore's love potions don't make you fall in love, they heighten emotions that are already there. So Lenny actually does love Yuka, but the way he expresses it ticks her off and she storms off. But the important thing to note is this magic hypnotizing video game has not changed who he is fundamentally. It's just caused him to be a little bit distracted here and there. He's not putting any real thought or effort at this time into being a rude or cantankerous person. So there you go. Elves are not naturally mean. It's the awful society they live in that's forcing them into this behavior because they feel they have no other options at this point. The second episode that I want to talk about is An Elf in School. And guys, this one threw me for a loop the first time I watched it because I thought it was going in a completely different direction. So we start out at Toon's school, and the problems are almost immediate. So these elf parents are trying to enroll their son Damien in school, and yeah, they're being portrayed as neglectful parents who are just trying to shove their kid off on someone else. But Toon, supposedly one of the good people in this show, immediately says, "Don't you have schools for elves?" What is this segregation bullshit? Why did they include this in a kid's show? And she is obviously uncomfortable with an elf being in her classroom. She's putting on a fake smile. She's like obviously cracking her mask here and there. And yeah, Damien is playing pranks, getting into trouble, causing trouble for other people. But by this show's own admission, he has never had a good role model before. But how do they solve the problem of this episode? The problem being an elf infiltrating their pixie school. Well, this little hellspawn scars Damien for life. She gives him legitimate trauma, and then they just run him off. Wow, what a great accepting society you have. The message here could have been, if somebody is acting out, they need love and attention and acceptance. But instead of that, we get, they're different than us, so we need to hide and make sure that they don't come back. Who approved this storyline for children? So, the last episode I want to talk about is called Giant Spider Invasion. This episode starts off with Nymphia talking to the Pixies under the Tree of Life, explaining how the elves' neighborhood is so run down and dirty that it's making their magic not work well. Which, side note, you should not segregate your neighborhoods by race. That is such a weird thing to include in a kid's show. But the elf neighborhood is run down and dirty, so what do the Pixies do about this? It's definitely not go and talk to them because they all live in the same community and they would also be in trouble if the Tree of Life's magic barrier didn't hold. No, they go on elves' private property and just forcefully start cleaning things. Laquette brought a flamethrower. This is dystopian. The elves do try to run off the pixies, but they're unsuccessful. So, as retaliation, they send giant monsters into Pixieville to make things a mess. And while this is not a great behavior, I gotta say, that is kind of the level of petty I would be on if I had magic and somebody broke into my house and messed with all of my stuff without asking. The fact that elves never get any kind of a redemption, they're never shown to be good people in their own way or anything, it's just so wrong. That's the only word for it. You can't just have a kid show and have them all be terrible to each other all the time. These shows are for kids to watch while they're still developing their opinions on the world, how they're going to handle things. I don't think every single show should be educational, but they definitely shouldn't have harmful ideas in them. And an underlying concept of othering people because of their race or how they look or their culture is absolutely wrong. I mean, this show didn't come out that long ago, a little over a decade, but were things really that bad in 2011? And with that, I believe I've covered just about everything I feel is worth talking about from this show. And I just want to say here at the end, I did not make any of these videos to rag on people who actually like Pop Pixie or any of the other shows that I will be talking about in the future. Though I don't personally care for this show, there's nothing wrong with having grown up with it or still liking it to this day, but I think it's also important to remember things that we like can have problematic aspects, and we shouldn't ignore those problematic aspects. So that just about does it for me. Thank you so much for watching. If you've got a recommendation for a magical girl show that I should look into, leave it down in the comments. If you have a preference over which series that I do next, respond to the comment that I'll have pinned. Alright, that does it for me. Peace out. Oh, wait, just a sec. I didn't have anywhere else to put this, but these pixie pig people have a suitcase full of sausage and ham, so cannibalism confirmed in Pixieville. All right, peace out.